Let's begin take number whatever take this is. So, hi, I'm Jenna. I usually do book reviews on my blog, Pending, at jenna-bird.blogspot.com. But this time I found myself with an opportunity to record in a quiet place and lacking my usual wordiness in writing. I am not very good at this talking thing. In fact, I think I'm really bad at it, but my brain's just not letting me communicate the way I feel about this book, or what I think in combination with how I feel, into something appropriate for a blog. So I'm going to try talking about my book to this cold lensed camera, and I'm going to believe that someone, you, actually care about what I'm saying and might be interested in picking up a very good book. And I will, of course, provide citations for that very good book claim. So let's get started. The book that I recently finished, boop, I'm not used to this backwards thing. I know it's not backwards, but it's SKYFARER by Joseph Brassey. It is the first book in the Drifting Lands series. The author is currently, as far as social media is concerned, working on the third book in the series, and let's hope that's not the last book in the series, right? So originally, I became aware of Joseph Brassey through a book launch held by the author of the Zombie Bible, Stant Latore. Let's hope I said that correctly. Let's hope I said Joseph's name correctly too, but if I didn't, I'm sure everyone will forgive me. I learned most of my words through reading. So Joseph was giving away doodles of artwork for random drawing winners, participants in conversations. So that's how I became aware of him. He does have other work, but I am perhaps a little ashamed to admit I've not read any of it. I know more about books than I've actually read books. And I think that's true of most literature students. Also, after a good number of years working on a literature degree, you'd think I'd have a little more eloquence when it comes to talking about books. But hang on, it's going to be a bumpy ride. In any case, I heard about SKYFARER. There were excerpts posted on Facebook that were really interesting. I got really excited about what the book was going to be about. I got excited about a couple of the blurbs that were put out. One of them, at least, is on the back here. So author Mark Teppo, who wrote Earth Thirst, which I have not read, so I don't have an opinion on Mark, but he says, to say that SKYFARER was Firefly meets the battle at Helm's Deep would be to dismiss the amazing world building that Brassey wraps us up in. More, please. I can get on board with that. And when Mark kind of separates SKYFARER from Firefly and the Battle of Helm's Deep, it isn't without a nod to the greatness that some of us find in both of those things. I lost my train of thought there for a second. Reading the back of the book, sorry. Put words in front of me, I'm going to start reading them. So lately I've been reading fantasy novels. Mostly I've been coming to them through giveaways and freebies on Amazon. I have over 1,000 books on my Kindle because a growing number of them are things I'm purchasing from authors instead of purchasing physical books, as I've run out of space in my tiny little room. But I had over 800 free books, or greatly reduced, 99 cents to $2.99 books through Amazon. And a lot of the fantasy I've been reading they've been debuts, they've been self-published, they've been kind of all over the board. But not many of them have managed to scratch the itch that I didn't realize I'd had, that I'd been ignoring for so long that I'd forgotten it was there. SKYFARER, in short, was a real joy to read. When I first came to fantasy fiction, there are some people who talk about how they've been reading fantasy since they were 6, or they got into writing when they were 3. Everybody's been doing everything since they could walk or talk or pick up a pen or pick up a book. Yes, I've been a reader most of my life. But the first book I remember having and reading was a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs read-along that came with the, I guess about that big, the vinyl record. So you had to have a record player to read along. I remember having that. I remember having some Pound Puppies books. The first novel I ever owned was Dragons of Autumn Twilight, the first Dragonlance novel, which I fished out of a dumpster behind an Eckerd pharmacy when I was, I want to say 11. It gets a little fuzzy. I'm not sure the year. I still have that book. The cover's been torn off the way that they do when they throw away paperback books. But I remember reading that novel, and I remember feeling just joy. There was a joy in the writing. It was adventurous. It wasn't entirely new. I wasn't unaware of a lot of the ins and outs of the fantasy genre. I knew about D&D. I started playing very young, but there was just something so much fun about the experience of reading that novel. And I got to feel that again reading SKYFARER, which, as far as I can tell, that's some of the highest praise that I could possibly give a book. When it can reach into those places where there are feelings and not just academia, the language of academia, and analysis, which I'm also a fan of doing, but sometimes you want to read a thing to have fun, and I absolutely did have fun reading this book. Brassey's not a novice in publishing, but for some reason I had it in my head that this was his first novel. I'm not really sure why I thought that at first. I knew it wasn't true. Like, I had the information and the knowledge to know that that was not accurate. But this, I think, because this comes out so clean, there's something pristine about this novel, in the sense that it comes out and it's genuine and it's earnest. I don't know how many more words. I think pristine is a good one. It would be easy to, I think, break this down and criticize certain things like cliches in fantasy. But I don't want to do that, because I think when we talk about cliches in fantasy fiction, or science fantasy, as I'm pretty sure this is classified, and if it isn't, it should be. I'll talk more about that in a second. But when we talk about fantasy and we talk about the cliches that show up in the fantasy genre, too often those discussions devolve into, oh, well, I hate X cliche. When really it's not a cliche, it's a standard, maybe it's a trope, but that's like saying, oh, I hate beef stew that's always got beef in it. You're eating beef stew, you had to know there would be beef, right? You're reading fantasy, you have to know you are going to encounter some of the common ingredients in what makes a fantasy a fantasy. I'm going to do my best not to spoil anything. I invite anybody who has read the book, though, to absolutely engage me through my blog, through my Facebook. I'm happy to talk about this book with people who want to talk about it. So, as I said, maybe I didn't say it yet. When I heard about this book, it came up on NetGalley, and I have a profile there, and I've used it to get books in advance to try to do advanced reviews, especially for authors that I know are developing, authors who've had work that I've enjoyed in the past. And this SKYFARER came up. I'm just gonna pop it up here because this title is awesome. Or this this cover is amazing, and I love everything about it. And I wish I could get a better shot of it, but my lighting situation in a hotel room is not going to do it justice. In any case, I got it on SKYFARER. Let me try that again. I got it on NetGalley. I started to read it digitally, and then I realized that I couldn't. I was making highlights and trying to make notes on my Kindle. It was too hard. So I waited. I delayed gratification as long as I could. I ordered it on Amazon and it came, and it's a beautiful, very beautiful paperback. It's about 350, nope, I lied. It is, sorry, there's a preview for the next book and it takes up some pages. Oh, it is 299 pages long, with a little bonus first 3 chapters for Dragon Road, the second book, which will be mine. Oh yes, it will be mine. So I got this, and this is why. Can you see all those little post-it notes? Those are little 1x2 post-it notes that I needed to make notes on as I read, either marking passages that I really enjoyed, capturing my reactions as I read, and there are a few of those. Some of them are simply just little hearts drawn onto the post-it note. But several of them are different and better. There are turns of phrases, there are sections where there are very visual descriptions. There is one on page 15, which is literally, I'm pretty sure it's the last page of the first chapter. Yes, chapter 1, The Portal Mage's Apprentice. I have a note that says, beautiful pacing, beautiful detail, I got teary. I'm not worried about spoiling the first chapter. It is when Amy is first, well, it's when she finds her home, even though she may not realize it for a little while yet in the book that this is her home now. Brassey captures a feeling that I think a lot of storytellers struggle to even put into words or to approach, let alone to tackle headlong in the first chapter. I think that having the association to Firefly in mind, for some readers, if you liked Firefly, if you understood some of the things that were being done in that show, if you understood or perceived some of the storytelling nuance and the pathos that were evoked and built into the story and not explicitly woven into what you saw in the show or in the film, I think that helps what Brassey's doing speak. At least it did for me. One of the things that I took away from my experience with Firefly was watching and understanding the way the spaces worked, the way the ship was a character, the way that it both shaped and assisted the character development and the relationships between characters. So there's that love for the ship that is Serenity in Firefly, and the author in SKYFARER really captures that when introducing Amy and the reader to Elysium, which is the name of this ship. I mean, I kept on with notes. I had a moment where I had to remind myself that this story does not take place in space. You will feel like this story takes place in space. It has a very space opera feel to it. But they're not in space. I mean, they're not in outer space. How about that? There are places where Brassey uses italics to really emphasize certain verbs. Well, one's an adverb, so it's a sort of verb. A couple of adjectives. But I've sat in on so many writing workshops and read little things, and they talk about not using italics for emphasis and not overusing them. And I felt that there's a period in here where Brassey really uses them to strong and precise effect. I really like that. That's page 130 to 131 if you wanted to read along at home. There's some very, very beautiful life lessons woven in here, and they're presented that way. Amy is a young portal mage who has been taken on as apprentice by the portal mage Harkon Bright and brought into the crew of the Elysium. I probably should have started with this summary, right? But I wanted to convince you that the book I was talking about was worth it for so much more than just the summary of what's going on. It's hard to do. It's hard to do. And it's hard to organize when I haven't scripted any of this out. So this is raw and uncut, what it's like talking to me, except you're not talking back and giving me the option to sit here and not say anything for a while. When I reached page 200, I included a note that says simply, "At page 200, there isn't enough book left for everything I want." And that's accurate. There were a couple moments where I make notes about how I hated the author, and then how I hated him less. There's some very interesting world building that goes on, and I have more than 2 or 3 sticky notes that simply say "more, please," especially in regards to the interiors of the Iron Hulk, which is another ship that the crew of the Elysium encounter, and is a focal entity through, well, not focal, but it's a big presence, no pun intended for those who've read it, through a good chunk of the story. But there's some very creepy stuff going on in its belly, and I want more of it. And then I just have some sticky notes that don't say anything. So, yeah, there's one line. I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this, and it's not a spoiler. The raw magic energy teased at her senses with the promise of everything, virtuous and vile, that could be done with it. I love that. I love that because I took a class on Tolkien that talked about power, and we broke down the ideas behind power and why power corrupts, and why Gandalf has to say no to the One Ring, and why Galadriel's so tempted but also still wisely says no, and why it's wise. And so that line really was evocative for me, and I really liked it. Moments like that helped me like Amy a lot. She is very assertive. She's externally sure of herself, but we get to see it's not really uncertainty that she struggles with so much as being able to recognize when something has gone wrong, when she's done wrong, knowing when it needs to be fixed. She's complex, but she's a presence, and she's not the bumbling, she's not the fool. She is not the tarot archetype of the fool starting out on an adventure. She is starting out on an adventure. She is new to this. She doesn't know what to expect. Things get pretty crazy pretty fast. But she's not inept. She's not naive, a little bit, but she's not annoyingly naive. How about that? She is not someone that you read about and go, how did you grow up in a world like this and not know what's going on? She doesn't know everything, though, and that too speaks to the skill of the author. Brassey has created a character who navigates this space between being new, being untested, sort of. She's gone to school and everything, but untested in the real world, untested in the field, untested in real situations that a textbook can't prepare you for, and someone who is savvy about what they do, somebody who knows what they're doing and how to do it, and has confidence in the skills that they have coming out of whatever program or experience they've had. I find that that's difficult to find in a book, to find a character who is already so developed when you meet them on the page. I absolutely want to know more about the other characters in the book too. Bjorn is probably my favorite, and there's a moment in there, most people could probably guess what it is, when my first sticky note that said I hated the author. There was some stuff going on I did not like. As a reader, I enjoyed it in the structure of things. As a reader experiencing the moment, did not like. but it was made up for, which is also important. P.S. The reason I quit reading Game of Thrones is because the emotional cost was not being repaid. There was no balance for me as a reader. In any case, I'm going to wrap this up because I've been going for 20 minutes. SKYFARER by Joseph Brassey. Right now, I think you can get it for something like $6.50 from Amazon. And in either case, the cost of a mass market paperback is less than $8. That is barely more than a venti chai latte from Starbucks. So I highly encourage you to go get it if you are someone I know or maybe someone I don't and you think that this sounds like a book you would really love to read. And you, especially if you know me, reach out to me and maybe I can get you something for Christmas, you know. But I'm not trying to sell the book by me buying it. I think that this book deserves support and readers, and I think that the effort put into reading it is minimal. It's not terribly complex, which is not a bad thing. Okay, I just want to say that. When I say something is not complex, I just mean it's fairly easy for you to follow the story, and there's always more for you to dig into if you want to. But if you're also looking for a straightforward, enjoyable adventure with a decent touch of heart and a good helping of brains, this is definitely a book to pick up. So I still feel like my review here has been lackluster, that I don't know if I really communicated how strongly I feel that this was an excellent addition to science fiction, science fantasy, fantasy, however you want to genre define this book. I feel that this is a powerful addition. This is a book that I'm hoping when the series is done, there's a hardback collection, because I absolutely would be honored to put this on my shelf next to the Cold Fire trilogy by C.S. Friedman, which is one of my favorite science fantasy books. It was my first science fantasy. Friedman blew my mind when that reveal happened in those books. So I would also put this up there with Sherry S. Tepper's A Plague of Angels. Obviously, I've made associations with Tolkien here, not in the long historical mythology building sense, but in the high stakes, the struggles of power, good and evil, but it's not really about good and evil, and I like the way that that Brassey really starts to handle those concepts in this, and there's promise of more of that in the future, and that is a promise that I am happy to hang on to and look forward to seeing fulfilled or denied. I trust the author to do what is best by the story, as he has already and did quite well. So yeah, that's my nearly 25-minute review of a book, and it was a lot faster for me to do it this way, but had I written it, it would be a lot faster for you to read.